September 23rd, 1942. The sun-baked sands of El Alamein, Egypt, stretched endlessly under a sky choked with dust. The air hummed with the low growl of distant engines, punctuated by the sharp crack of rifle fire echoing across no man's land. Lieutenant Elias Thorne crouched behind a makeshift barricade of sandbags and rusted truck parts. His khaki uniform caked in grit that itched like 1,000 tiny needles. Sweat trickled down his neck, mixing with the metallic tang of gun oil from his Sten gun. Around him, the men of the 50th Royal Tank Regiment's reconnaissance platoon huddled in tense silence, their faces shadowed under steel helmets, eyes darting toward the horizon where the German lines shimmered like a mirage. Thorne wiped his brow with a grimy sleeve, glancing at his sergeant, a wiry Scotsman named McTavish, who was fiddling with the dials on a battered wireless set number 19. The radio hissed and spat static, occasionally resolving into fragmented voices from HQ, orders laced with urgency about Montgomery's push to break the Afrika Korps' stranglehold. "Bloody heat's worse than the Jerry's," McTavish muttered, his brogue thick as porridge. Thorne nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. For weeks they'd been probing the Axis defenses, those damned 88mm flak guns hidden in wadis and behind minefields, turning British Matildas into scrap with surgical precision. Intelligence reports painted a grim picture. Rommel's artillery was everywhere, zeroed in on every approach, waiting like patient predators. The wind picked up, carrying the faint rumble of tracks, enemy patrols maybe. Thorne's heart thudded against his ribs as he peered through his binoculars. There, a mile out, a dust plume rose from a Panzer III scouting the flank. No time for heroics. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running low on everything. "Hold fire," Thorne whispered, his voice steady despite the knot in his gut. The platoon, 8 men, including a lanky signals corporal named Jenkins, froze, breaths shallow. Jenkins clutched a smoke grenade, its pineapple shape cool against his palm, but Thorne shook his head. Not yet. Brute force wouldn't cut it here. They needed something clever, something to throw sand in the eyes of those gun crews. Back at the forward observation post that afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the Mediterranean, Thorne gathered his thoughts amid the chaos of camp. Tents flapped in the breeze, generators chugged like asthmatic beasts, and the acrid smell of diesel mingled with the earthy scent of brewing tea. Major Hargrove, their CO, paced the canvas map table, his mustache twitching as he jabbed a finger at the scribbled lines marking the Devil's Gardens, minefields laced with anti-tank traps. "We've lost 3 Shermans this week alone," Hargrove growled, his South African accent clipped. "Those 88s are picking us off before we even spot the bastards. We need eyes on their batteries, Thorne, or Monty's offensive is dead in the water." Thorne leaned over the map, tracing the contours of the Ruwaisat Ridge, where the heaviest concentrations lay. Recon flights from the RAF's Desert Air Force had buzzed overhead that morning, their Hurricanes spitting bullets at anything that moved, but the artillery stayed buried, camouflaged under netting and dunes. "Sir, direct assault's suicide," Thorne said, his voice low. "But what if we distract them, make them think we're coming from the wrong angle?" Hargrove raised an eyebrow, skepticism etched in his weathered face. The Major was a veteran of Tobruk, no stranger to desperation, but Thorne's idea felt half-formed. Born from sleepless nights staring at the stars, it started as a whisper in the mess tent that evening, under the flicker of hurricane lamps. The men passed around bully beef tins and cigarettes, the conversation turning to old tricks from the Western Desert Campaign. Jenkins, nursing a bandaged hand from a close shave with a booby trap, piped up. "Remember that time in Gazala? Yanks used smoke pots to cover a flank march, clouds the whole valley, blinds the spotters." McTavish chuckled, exhaling smoke from his woodbine. "Aye, but Rommel's boys saw through that. They'd shell the smoke itself, waste good rounds." Thorne listened, the pieces clicking. What if they flipped it? Not to hide, but to bait. A stupid feint. Deploy smoke in a pattern mimicking troop movements, drawing fire to empty ground while the real push slipped through elsewhere. By midnight, the plan took shape in Thorne's notebook, scribbled by the dim glow of a torch. They'd use the standard number 24 smoke grenades, the ones packed with hexachloroethane that billowed thick, choking white fog for up to 10 minutes. But instead of a screen, they'd space them out. Clusters to simulate vehicle exhaust, drifting patterns to fake infantry advances. The wind was key. Tonight's breeze from the northwest would carry it toward the German lines, fooling their forward observers into calling in barrages on ghosts. "It's daft," McTavish admitted over a shared flask of watered rum, the burn chasing away the desert chill. But daft might just work, better than dying in a tin coffin. Dawn crept in with a rosy haze, the call to prayer echoing faintly from Allied lines as Thorne's team loaded up. They piled into a pair of Bren carriers, the tracked vehicles rumbling softly over the hardpan, their 303 machine guns manned and ready. Thorne rode shotgun in the lead, the canvas windscreen flapping against his cheek. The air grew heavier, laced with the promise of cordite from yesterday's skirmishes. As they crested a low rise, the enemy positions came into view, silhouettes of gun emplacements half buried, crews stirring like ants in the early light. Thorne's pulse quickened. This was it. "Jenkins, on my mark," he said, gripping the armrest. The corporal nodded, fingers white on the grenade pins. The first puffs erupted 50 yards ahead, white tendrils uncoiling into the breeze, twisting eastward toward the ridge. Thorne watched, breath held as the smoke coalesced. Not a wall, but wisps curling like exhaust trails from phantom tanks. In the distance, a flare arced up from the German side, a signal. Then the earth trembled. Shells whistled overhead, slamming into the empty sand where the smoke danced, fountains of dirt erupting in futile rage. Thorne's lips curved in a grim smile. It was working, the stupid trick pulling their fire, buying precious minutes. But as the barrage intensified, a spotter's eye might pierce the veil, and the real danger loomed just beyond the haze. If you want to hear how this gamble unfolded amid the chaos of El Alamein, hit that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from the front lines. The barrage hammered the desert like the wrath of some ancient god, shells from the 80mm guns screeching through the air before detonating in geysers of sand and shrapnel that rained down like fiery hail. Lieutenant Elias Thorne gripped the edge of the Bren carrier, the vehicle's tracks churning silently as it idled behind a shallow depression. The smoke wisps ahead twisted mockingly in the wind, drawing the full fury of the Afrika Korps artillery onto barren ground. You could almost feel the ground shudder beneath you, each impact sending vibrations up through your boots, the acrid stench of cordite burning your nostrils even from half a mile back. "Keep it steady, lads," Thorne called over the din, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. McTavish, manning the 303 Bren gun, nodded grimly, his eyes narrowed against the dust whipped up by the explosions. Jenkins lobbed another grenade from the carrier's side, the pin clinking free before it arced into the haze. More smoke bloomed, deliberate clusters now, spaced to mimic the exhaust of a squadron of Crusader tanks probing the flank. The pattern was Thorne's design, erratic bursts to suggest hesitant advances, drifts that feigned infantry squads darting between dunes. It was crude, this stupid ruse, but in the heat of El Alamein, where every real move cost lives, deception was the only currency that didn't bankrupt you. From their vantage, the German response unfolded like a deadly ballet. Through the binoculars, Thorne spotted the forward observers, silhouetted figures in Feldgrau uniforms, crouched behind periscopes on the Ruweisat ridge. One raised a flare pistol, the red streak slicing the morning sky, signaling adjustments to the battery commanders hunkered in their sandbagged pits. Navalwerfer rockets joined the fray next, those screaming multiple rocket launchers unleashing a salvo that turned the smoke-shrouded patch into a hellscape of craters. "They're buying it?" Jenkins shouted, a rare grin cracking his dust-caked face. But Thorne knew better. Elation was a luxury they couldn't afford. The wind was shifting slightly, veering south, and if it carried the smoke too far, it might reveal the emptiness beneath. Back at the observation post, Major Hargrove monitored the wireless set number 19's crackle of reports, his face illuminated by the green glow of the valve tubes. "Thorne's team reports initial success," the signaller relayed, scribbling coordinates on a notepad. "Enemy fire concentrated on grid square 4729, empty sector." Hargrove allowed himself a tight smile, pounding a fist on the map table where pins marked the evolving front. Montgomery's grand plan hinged on this. The 8th Army's infantry and armor massing unseen to the north, ready to punch through the weakened Axis lines once the artillery was drawn out and suppressed. But intelligence whispers from ultra-D crypts at Bletchley Park had warned of Rommel's countermeasures, roving spotter teams with motorcycles equipped with Fuji radios to relay sightings faster than a desert hare. Thorne's carrier lurched forward incrementally, creeping closer under cover of the growing smoke pall. The air thickened with the chemical bite of the hexachlorothane, stinging eyes and throats, but it masked their engine noise perfectly. McTavish swept the horizon with his gun barrel, spotting a glint. Sun on metal, perhaps a German half-track patrolling the edge of the minefield. "Contact! 11 o'clock, he barked. Thorne swung his Sten gun around, heart pounding as the distant vehicle resolved into an CD KFZ 250, its armored side scarred from prior engagements. The half-track halted, a crewman dismounting with a pair of binoculars, if he pierced the deception. "More smoke now," Thorne ordered. Jenkins and the others hurled a fresh volley, the grenades thudding into the sand and erupting in synchronized puffs. This batch formed a line simulating a hasty tank lager. Vehicles circled defensively as if pinned down by counterfire. The half-track's observer froze, then scrambled back aboard, radioing furiously. Moments later, the earth groaned again as 105mm howitzers from a hidden Italian battery joined the German guns, their shells walking the barrage eastward, chewing up more phantom positions. Sand sprayed high, one round landing perilously close to the smoke's edge, forcing Thorne's team to hunker down as fragments whistled overhead. In the midst of it, doubt crept in like the chill of encroaching night. Thorne recalled the briefings. Rommel's gunners were veterans, schooled in the blitzkrieg arts, quick to adapt. What if they shelled the smoke generators themselves? The number 24 grenades were finite, only 24 per carrier, and resupply meant exposing runners to sniper fire from the Devil's Gardens. "It's holding, sir," McTavish said, reloading his Bren with a metallic clack. "But if they wise up, we're sitting ducks." Thorne clapped his shoulder, forcing resolve into his tone. "Then we make 'em chase ghosts a bit longer. For Monty, for the lads waiting in the wings." As the morning wore on, the trick's ingenuity began to pay dividends. RAF spotters in the sky, circling in their P-40 Kitty Hawks, radioed confirmations. Axis batteries fully committed, their muzzles flashing blindly into the haze, ammo dumps depleting with every futile volley. One German 88 crew, overzealous in their response, even displaced forward to support the feint, exposing themselves to a waiting British counter-battery shoot from 25-pounder field guns. The boom of those replies echoed triumphantly, shells arcing back to silence a pair of the dreaded anti-tank killers. Yet amid the apparent victory, a shadow fell. Thorne's radio crackled to life, Hargrove's voice cutting through the static. "Thorne, report unusual activity. Enemy patrols vectoring on your smoke. Looks like they're sniffing for the source." Thorne's stomach twisted. The half-track from earlier was multiplying. Dust trails converged from the south, motorcycles and light recon cars probing the flanks. The stupid smoke had lured the big guns, but now it was drawing the wolves closer, their machine pistols chattering in short bursts that stitched the sand. One bullet ricocheted off the carrier's armor with a sharp ping, inches from Jenkins' leg. "Pull back! Form up!" Thorne yelled, the engine roaring to life as they reversed into a waddy's embrace. The smoke continued its dance, buying seconds, but the noose tightened. In the distance, a new flare burst, not red, but green, a signal for reserves. Rommel's ingenuity matched their own. If the patrols closed in, the trick would unravel, exposing not just Thorne's team, but the entire northern thrust. As the carriers bumped over rocky terrain, Thorne glanced back at the maelstrom they'd ignited, wondering if their gamble had lit a fuse too short to control. The real battle was just awakening, and the desert held no mercy for the unwary. The wadi's jagged walls rose like the ribs of some colossal beast, shielding Thorne's Bren carriers from the probing eyes of the Axis patrols as they barreled through the narrow defile. Dust choked the air inside the vehicle, coating tongues and lungs, while the engine's growl reverberated off the rocks, a desperate bid to outrun the closing net. Lieutenant Elias Thorne braced against the dashboard, his Sten gun slung across his chest, the weight a grim comfort, as bullets from pursuing motorcycles snapped overhead like angry hornets. You could taste the fear in the confined space, salty sweat mingling with the oily reek of the carrier's transmission, every jolt over loose stones jarring your teeth. "Flank left, driver!" Thorne barked, pointing to a fork where the wadi split toward a cluster of acacia scrub. The lead carrier veered sharply, its tracks spitting gravel, while McTavish twisted in the gunner's seat to spray a burst from the Bren. The 303 rounds cracked out, stitching the leads and KFZs and 250 half-track and forcing its crew to swerve into a dune. One German rider tumbled from his BMW motorcycle, rolling in the sand before scrambling for cover, his MP-40 submachine gun barking futilely. "Got the bastard!" McTavish grunted, slamming home another magazine, but his eyes betrayed the strain. Dark circles from nights without sleep, the desert's relentless grind etching lines deeper than his 30 years. Behind them, the smoke ruse persisted, a fading spectre on the horizon. Jenkins had rigged a crude timer with his watch, and a few numbered 24 grenades lashed to the carrier's rear, set to pop at intervals and sustain the illusion from afar. White plumes still rose sporadically, twisting in the strengthening breeze, drawing sporadic shells that cratered the empty expanse. But the patrols were the real threat now. Rommel's light reconnaissance elements, the Aufklärungsabteilung, honed from years of desert fox hunts. Thorne's radio hissed with fragmented updates from the observation post. Enemy recon confirmed. 3 half-tracks and 6 bikes vectoring east. Hold the line, Thorne. Monty's armor is rolling up north. In the forward OP, Major Hargrove wiped sweat from his brow with a handkerchief stained by endless cups of brackish tea, his eyes glued to the map where colored threads marked the feint's impact. The wireless set, number 19, buzzed incessantly, relaying fire mission corrections to the 25-pounder batteries of the 74th Field Regiment, their guns thundering in response to the ultra-fed intel on Axis positions. "Thorne's buying us time," Hargrove said to his adjutant, a fresh-faced lieutenant from Kent whose hands trembled slightly on the field phone. "But if those patrols pin him, the whole northern hook unravels. Signal the Desert Air Force. Get some hurry bombers on those dust trails." High above, the RAF's Hurricane streaked in from the carrier, HMS Furious, their Merlin engines a throaty roar that drowned the desert's whispers. Pilot Officer Ellis, gripping the stick of his fighter bomber, banked low over the Ruwaysat Ridge, his goggles fogging from the strain. Below, the smoke danced like a siren's call, but his eyes locked on the converging patrols, tiny specks kicking up sand plumes toward the wadi. "Tally-ho, bandits on the deck!" he radioed, thumbs pressing the bomb release as 250-pounders tumbled earthward. Explosions bloomed along the patrol route, one half-track flipping end over end in a fireball of twisted metal and spilled fuel, its crew spilling out like broken dolls. Thorne's team crested the wadi's end, bursting into a shallow basin dotted with camel thorn bushes that scratched at the carrier's sides like skeletal fingers. They killed the engines, the sudden silence amplifying the distant crump of artillery and the fading chatter of small arms. "Dismount and cover!" Thorne ordered, leaping to the ground with a thud that jarred his knees. The platoon fanned out. 8 men now down to 7 after a stray round clipped Private Ellis in the skirmish, taking positions behind boulders and the carrier's hulks. Jenkins unslung his smoke grenades, but Thorne waved him off. "Save 'em. We need to draw these wolves deeper. Make 'em commit." The first patrol crested the rise minutes later, engines whining as 2 remaining half-tracks and 4 motorcycles fanned out in a skirmish line. German voices shouted in guttural commands, the lead vehicle's MG-34 chattering as it swept the basin. Bullets whined off rocks, forcing McTavish to duck low, his helmet clanging. Thorne sighted down his Sten's sights, squeezing off controlled bursts that dropped a rider from his bike, the man crumpling with a cry that echoed hollowly. "Pour it on!" he yelled, and the platoon responded, a ragged volley from Lee Enfield's and Thompson's that pinned the half-tracks behind a rise. In the chaos, Thorne's mind raced through the calculus of survival. The smoke trick had worked its magic, pulling the big gun's teeth. Reports confirmed 3 88mm batteries low on ammo, their crews frantically reloading from depleted dumps. But this close-quarters scrap was the cost, human and raw. Jenkins, bandaged hand forgotten, lobbed a Mills bomb that arced perfectly into the nearest half-track's path. The blast ripping its tracks and sending shrapnel scything through the air. You felt the heat of it wash over you, the acrid bite of explosives mingling with the metallic tang of blood from a grazed shoulder. The Germans faltered, one half-track reversing as its commander radioed for support, but the RAF strikes sealed their retreat. Hurricanes dove again, cannons flashing, turning the motorcycles into smoking wrecks. Thorne watched through the dust, chest heaving, as the survivors peeled away south, their deception pierced, but the broader ruse intact. "Regroup," he called, helping Jenkins to his feet. McTavish spat a wad of tobacco-laced phlegm, reloading with hands steadier now. "That'll teach the buggers to chase shadows." By midday, as the sun hammered down like a blacksmith's forge, Thorne's radio crackled with Hargrove's praise, laced with urgency. "Well done, Lieutenant. Batteries suppressed, northern push commencing. But Rommel's shifting reserves. Get your team to grid 5231 for link-up." Thorne nodded to the empty air, the weight of command settling heavier. The stupid smoke had ignited a chain reaction, emptying Axis artillery magazines and blinding their spotters long enough for the 8th Army's 51st Highland Division to advance under cover of their own creeping barrage. Tanks rumbled unseen to the north, Shermans and Churchills grinding forward, their 75mm guns probing for the gaps. Yet victory tasted like grit. As the carriers fired up again, threading toward the rendezvous, Thorne spotted fresh dust on the horizon. More patrols, or perhaps panzers redeploying. The desert's vastness hid 1,000 threats, and Rommel, that cunning fox, wouldn't stay fooled forever. The real test loomed. Could the trick scale to the full offensive, or would it crumble under the Afrika Korps' counterpunch, leaving Thorne's men as the first to pay the price? The desert sun clawed at the horizon, turning the sky into a furnace as Thorne's Bren carriers rattled toward grid 5231, the coordinates etched in his mind like a scar. The air shimmered with heat haze, distorting the distant silhouettes of palm groves and the faint outline of the Katara Depression to the south. Inside the lid vehicle, the engine's labored whine competed with the clatter of loose gear, while McTavish nursed a fresh cut on his forearm from the skirmish, wrapping it with a strip torn from his puttee. Blood soaked through quickly, but he waved off Jenkins' concern, muttering, "Just a scratch, lad. Seen worse in a Glasgow pub brawl. Thorne scanned the terrain through the dust-caked windscreen, his Sten gun resting across his knees, the pistol grip slick with sweat. The smoke tricks echoes lingered in the radio chatter, Hargrove's updates painting a picture of momentum, the 51st Highland Division's pipers skirling over the dunes as their Bren carriers and Universal trucks surged forward, infantry in khaki battle dress hugging the ground ahead of the creeping barrage from 5-inch mediums. But Thorne felt the fragility of it all. One wrong turn, and Rommel's panzers could slam the door shut. "Eyes sharp," he said, his voice low. "Link-up's our ticket out, but the Africa Corps doesn't hand out invitations." They crested a low escarpment, the carrier's tracks grinding over scree that skittered like dry bones. Below, the rendezvous point buzzed with activity. A makeshift Lager of the 2nd Armoured Brigade, Shermans hulking like steel behemoths under camouflage netting, their long 75mm barrels elevated toward the ridge. Engineers from the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Corps swarmed a disabled Crusader, sparks flying from welders as they patched its turret ring. Thorne signaled a halt, and the platoon dismounted, boots sinking into the powdery sand that billowed up in choking clouds. Captain Riley, the brigade's intelligence officer, strode over, his face ruddy under a pith helmet, clipboard in hand. "Thorne, your little fog show saved our hides up north. Those 88s are punching at shadows, lost 2 batteries to our counterfire already." Relief washed over Thorne like cool water, but it was fleeting. As they huddled by a jeep-mounted mapboard, Riley traced the lines with a stubby finger. "Monty's committing the lot now. 23rd Armoured pushing the centre, New Zealanders on the left hook. But Rommel's no fool. His 15th Panzer Division's redeploying from the coast road, Tigers leading the van. We've got hours, maybe less, before they plug the gaps." McTavish spat into the dust, his brogue edged with fatigue. "So what's the play? More smoke to greet the cats?" Riley nodded grimly. "Exactly. Scale it up. We've got smoke mortars from the 1st RHA, Liven's projectors, the lot. Your pattern works small. Now blanket the flank to mask the 4th Light Brigade's thrust." Thorne's mind reeled at the scope. The original ruse was a platoon-sized gamble. This was divisional deception, dozens of number 24 grenades and projector drums belching hexachloroethane across miles. As the sun dipped, casting long shadows that clawed across the sand, Thorne's team integrated into the preparations. Jenkins helped load the carriers with fresh supplies, crates of grenades stacked like cordwood, their zinc casings cool against the evening chill. The air filled with the sharp tang of oil from idling tanks and the murmur of orders. "Wire the projectors to the number 38 sets. Sink the bursts." Engineers tested the Liven's drums, squat cylinders buried in shallow pits, their propellant charges primed to hurl smoke shells up to 1,000 yards. Night fell like a blanket, stars pricking the velvet sky as the wind whispered promises of deception. Thorne climbed aboard a commandeered Sherman for the forward push, the turret's basket creaking under his weight. The tank's commander, a burly sergeant named Wilkins from the Royal Tank Regiment, clapped him on the back. "Heard your trick's the talk of the brigade. Let's see if it fools the big boys." The column lurched forward at dusk, a serpent of steel. 20 Shermans flanked by carriers and half-tracks, their blackout lights dim slits against the encroaching dark. Distant flares from the front lit the horizon in staccato bursts, the rumble of 25-pounders a constant thunder. Halfway to the objective, a bottleneck wadi leading to the Ruvisat's eastern spur, the order came. "Projectors! Fire!" Over the radio, Thorne coordinated from the tank's cupola, binoculars pressed to his eyes. The Livens erupted in sequence, muffled whooshes launching drums that arced silently before bursting into vast clouds. White smoke unfurled like ghostly sails. the wind from the northwest, carrying it in deliberate waves, clusters simulating tank exhaust, linear drifts mimicking infantry lines, even swirling eddies to fake dust from wheeled columns. You could hear the hush of it spreading, a chemical fog that swallowed sounds and shapes, turning the desert into a void where imagination filled the gaps. From the German side, the response was immediate, visceral. Thorne watched through the gloom as flares popped skyward, illuminating spotters scrambling to their KZS-3 periscopes. Radios crackled with frantic clicks, coordinates barked in clipped German. Then the shells came, 105mm howitzers from the Italian Ariete division walking fire into the smoke, followed by the higher-pitched scream of 88s zeroing on the Phantoms. Explosions ripped through the haze, orange blooms lighting the night, but they struck empty sand, cratering dunes that avalanched into pits. "It's holding, keep the pattern," Thorne radioed, his voice steady despite the tank's hull vibrating from near misses. Inside the Sherman, tension coiled like a spring. Wilkins peered through the episcope, sweat beading on his brow. Bloody beautiful. They're committing everything, Nebelwerfers lighting up the whole sector. McTavish, wedged in the loader's hatch, chuckled darkly. Aye, wasting powder on our invisible army. But doubt gnawed. Resupply trucks lagged behind, bogged in soft patches, and ultra-intercepts warned of Stuka dive bombers vectored from Tobruk. One drum misfired, a gap in the smoke revealing a glint of British tracks too soon. A probing 50mm pack gun from a Panzergrenadier outpost spat rounds, one ricocheting off the Sherman's glacis with a clang that echoed like doom. The real push exploited the chaos. To the north, the 4th Light Brigade's Daimler armoured cars slipped through the blinded lines, their 2-pounder guns popping at disoriented sentries. Infantry from the Black Watch followed, bayonets fixed, creeping under the barrage's cover. Thorne's heart raced as reports flooded in. An 88 battery overrun, its crew surrendering with hands up. A fuel dump torched, flames leaping high enough to silhouette Rommel's reserves scrambling south. Yet, as the smoke thinned with the wind's fickle shift, a new roar pierced the night. Ju-87 Stukas, their Jericho sirens wailing like banshees as they stooped on the Lega. Bombs walked the rear echelons, one glancing the supply convoy and sending a projector truck skyward in a fireball. Shrapnel pattered against the Sherman's turret like lethal rain, forcing Wilkins to button up. "Anti-air! Tracer up!" The tanks, 50 Browning, chattered, but the Stukas pulled out, leaving craters and cries in their wake. Thorne gripped the radio handset, relaying adjustments. Tighten the clusters, draw their eyes east. The ruse adapted, projectors firing double time, but ammo dwindled, crews sweating over hot barrels. By moonrise, the tide seemed to turn. RAF night fighters from No. 238 Squadron pounced, their bow fighters shredding a Stuka formation with 20mm cannons, debris raining like confetti. On the ground, the Highlanders breached the wadi, capturing a forward OP intact, maps and radios spilling secrets of Rommel's fallback lines. Thorne exhaled, the acrid smoke clinging to his uniform like a second skin. "We've cracked it," Wilkins said, but Thorne saw the cost. Wrecked vehicles smouldering, medics hauling wounded under lantern light, faces pale with shock. As the column consolidated, pushing toward the ridge's crest, Thorne spotted movement in the smoke's fringes, Panzer IVs, their long 75mm KWK guns traversing blindly. The stupid trick had lured the artillery to ruin, but now the panzers prowled the edges, their spotters piercing the veil with infrared scopes scavenged from U-boats. One shell howled close, buckling a track on a trailing carrier. The night deepened, the desert's secrets unraveling. And Thorne wondered if their deception had brought victory or merely delayed the Afrika Korps' fangs from sinking deeper into the 8th Army's throat. The Panzer IV's turret traversed with a mechanical whine that cut through the thinning smoke like a predator's growl, its long-barreled 75mm WK-40 locking onto the Sherman silhouette just as the haze parted. Lieutenant Elias Thorne ducked low in the cupola, the night air thick with the oily residue of hexachlorothane and the sharper bite of diesel exhaust from the idling German tanks. Inside the Sherman, the loader's frantic clank of shells echoed in the confined space, while Sergeant Wilkins barked into the intercom, "Gunner, traverse right, 200 yards!" The turret slewed, the coaxial baser machine gun chattering in response, but the first enemy round struck home with a deafening crack, slamming into the turret's mantlet and sending sparks dancing across the vision slits. You could feel the jolt ripple through the hull, vibrating up your spine like a thunderclap trapped in steel. "Traverse failed! Jammed!" the gunner yelled, sweat streaming down his face in the red glow of the battle lamp. Thorne's heart hammered as he grabbed the override handle, muscles straining to force the turret manually, while McTavish, crammed in beside him, fed rounds into the 50 Browning on the roof. Bullets from the Panzer's MG-34 stitched the air, pinging off the glacis plate like hail on tin. The smoke projectors nearby fired erratically now, their crews silhouetted against the flares, desperate bursts creating patchy veils that bought seconds, not minutes. Jenkins, hunkered by a Livens drum a dozen yards off, hurled a number 24 grenade into the fray, the white cloud blooming just in time to obscure the Panzer's sightlines. "Keep 'em guessing," Thorne shouted over the din, his voice raw from inhaled dust. From the German commander's view, the scene must have been a nightmare of illusions, British phantoms materializing and vanishing in the fog, the patterned smoke mimicking a disorganized advance that pulled at their nerves. Rommel's 15th Panzer Division, veterans of the Gazala line, were no strangers to feints, but this one gnawed at their discipline. In a forward bunker on the ridge, Oberleutnant Klaus Weber peered through his Zeiss binoculars, the green glow of a flare illuminating his scarred face. "It's a trick! Shirts! But where's the real thrust?" He snapped to his radio man, who relayed frantic adjustments to the battery nets. Their 88s, already low on high explosive rounds after hours of pounding ghosts, coughed sporadic fire into the murk. Each shell a wasteful roar that echoed the frustration building in the Afrika Korps' ranks. Thorne's Sherman lurched backward under Wilkins' orders, the driver reversing blindly through a curtain of smoke, while the column's other tanks, Churchill's from the 48th Battalion, their thick armor shrugging off glancing hits, returned fire. A 75mm round from a flanking Sherman found its mark, punching through the Panzer IV's side and erupting in a gout of flame that lit the night like a signal fire. The German crew bailed out, shadows scrambling into the dunes, but more engines rumbled from the south. Reinforcements, perhaps a platoon of Mark III's with their 50mm guns probing for weaknesses. The air filled with the staccato of Schmeisser MP40s from Panzer Grenadiers dismounting, their figures ghosting through the haze, grenades arcing toward the British lager. Back at the brigade HQ, a canvas tent fluttering in the wind, Major Hargrove slammed the field phone down, his mustache quivering with barely contained fury. The wireless set, number 19, spat updates. Thorne's sector holding, but Panzer's counter-attacking, smoke thinning fast. He turned to Captain Riley, who pored over a captured German map stained with coffee rings. Ultras screaming about Rommel pulling his 21st Panzer from the coastal flank. "If we don't blind 'em now, the whole line buckles." Riley nodded, signaling the signallers to patch through to the Royal Artillery. "Fire the chemical barrage, mustard dummies if we have to, but keep the projectors hot." It was a desperate escalation, not just smoke, but layered deceptions with phosphorus flares to simulate burning vehicles, drawing the Panzers into kill zones pre-registered by the 25-pounders. On the ground, Thorne's team adapted in the crucible, the Sherman ground to a halt in a shallow revetment, its tracks fouled by a minefield's edge, S-mine, bouncing Betty telltales, glinting under moonlight. "Dismount! Form a perimeter!" Thorne ordered, leaping out with his Sten at the ready. The platoon coalesced around the tank, McTavish's Bren laying down suppressive fire that forced a squad of Germans to ground. Jenkins rigged the last of the grenades on tripwires, their pins tied to empty ammo crates as booby traps, while Private Ellis, the wounded man from earlier, clutched his Lee Enfield one-handed, eyes fierce despite the pain etching his young face. Bullets whined past, one grazing Thorne's helmet with a metallic tang that left his ear ringing. He dropped a German grenadier with a burst, the man's cry swallowed by the chaos, but the cost mounted. A Churchill brewed up nearby, its turret blown skyward in a blossom of orange, crewmen stumbling out wreathed in flames. The wind betrayed them then, gusting from the east and shredding the smoke into tatters, revealing the British thrust in stark relief. Panzers exploited the gap, their diesel engines bellowing as they charged, treads pulverizing the sand into a choking pall. Thorne radioed frantically, "Hargrove, smoke's failing! Need air support!" The response crackled back, "Hurry bombers inbound! Hold 5!" Above, the RAF's Desert Air Force answered the call, Merlin engines howling as 6 Hurricanes dove from the stars, their 40mm cannons and rockets turning the Panzer advance into a graveyard of twisted hulks. One Stuka, late to the party, stooped in retaliation, its siren wailing, but a Kitty Hawk interceptor shredded it mid-dive, wreckage plummeting like a fallen angel. In the melee's heart, Thorne faced a crossroads moment. A Panzer III bore down, its bow gunner spotting him through the drifts. No time for subtlety. He snatched a Piat anti-tank projector from a fallen sapper, the cumbersome tube heavy in his arms. "Cover me!" he yelled to McTavish, who hosed the approach with his Bren. Thorne braced, sighting the black cross on the turret, and fired. The bomb streaked out with a whoosh, slamming into the glacis and erupting in a flash that halted the beast. Smoke, real this time, billowing from its engine decks. The crew evacuated, hands raised, their faces pale masks of defeat under the flares. As the skirmish ebbed, dawn's first light bled across the horizon, painting the battlefield in bloody hues. Thorne slumped against the Sherman's side, breath ragged, the acrid stench of cordite and charred metal clinging to everything. Reports trickled in. The 4th Light Brigade had punched through to the ridge's base, capturing 288 batteries intact, their crews yielding to overwhelming odds. Montgomery's offensive surged, the New Zealand division linking up to the north, their carriers slicing Axis supply lines. The stupid smoke had scaled into legend, exhausting Rommel's artillery reserves and fracturing his defensive web. But the Panzer's fury had exacted a toll, dozens of tanks smoking, medics weaving through the wounded with morphine syrettes and stretchers. Hargrove's voice broke over the radio, laced with gravelly approval. "Thorne, you've turned the tide. Regroup at the ridge. Final push incoming. Rommel's cracking." Thorne nodded wearily, helping Jenkins bind a fresh wound, the Scotsman's hand steady despite the blood. Victory hovered, tangible now, but the desert whispered warnings. The Africa Corps diehards rallied, Stukas regrouping for a last sting, and Rommel's genius might yet conjure a counterstroke from the chaos. As the sun rose, illuminating the craters and corpses, Thorne wondered if their trick had truly broken the fox, or if the fangs waited just beyond the dawn's glare. The first rays of dawn sliced through the smoke like golden knives, illuminating the wreckage strewn across the Ruviset Ridge's eastern slopes. Lieutenant Elias Thorne leaned against the scarred hull of the Sherman, his uniform torn and caked with a mosaic of sand, blood, and chemical residue that itched relentlessly. The air hung heavy with the reek of smouldering rubber from a gutted Panzer IV, its turret askew like a broken jaw, while medics from the 51st Highland Division darted between the wounded, their voices a murmur of Gaelic curses and urgent commands. You could hear the distant wail of bagpipes now, carried on the breeze from the advancing lines, a defiant skirl that mocked the fading echoes of German artillery. Thorne wiped a streak of grime from his eyes. Scanning the horizon, where the Eighth Army's tide swelled, the stupid smoke trick had unraveled Rommel's web, its patterned clouds exhausting the Africa Corps' gun crews. 80 Didier-millimeter batteries silent for the first time in days, their ammunition lorries retreating under strafing from RAF Kittyhawks. Major Hargrove's voice crackled over the salvaged number 19 set in the lager. "Thorn, ridge secured. Your feint cracked 'em wide. 21st Panzer's pulling back to the Fuka line. Monty's boys are through." Relief flooded Thorn's veins like cool morphine, but it soured quickly at the sight of the human ledger. Jenkins sat nearby, his bandaged hand cradled, face ashen from blood loss. McTavish methodically cleaned his bren, ignoring the shrapnel embedded in his thigh, his brogue silent for once. The breakthrough unfolded in waves, the desert transforming from killing ground to corridor of triumph. To the north, the New Zealand 2nd Division's carriers churned forward, their 2-pounder guns popping at rearguard snipers from the Italian Folgore Parachute Brigade, who fought with desperate tenacity amid the minefields. Shermans from the 23rd Armoured Brigade rumbled past Thorn's position, their commanders waving from open hatches, the clatter of track links a symphony of momentum. Engineers bridged cratered wadis with Bailey sections, while sappers in khaki overalls swept for telemines, their detectors beeping like wary birds. The smoke projectors lay discarded now, empty drums glinting in the sun, their hexachloroethane legacy a faint, acrid haze that still tricked the eye. Rommel's retreat was no rout, but a masterful disengagement, the desert fox slipping his leash with the precision of a surgeon. From captured Enigma fragments decrypted at Bletchley Park, Thorn learned later how the feint had sown chaos in the Africa Corps' command nets. Oberkommando orders frantic, batteries repositioning blindly, only to blunder into pre-sighted British 25-pounders. One Italian 149mm howitzer position, drawn out by the Phantom clusters, was pulverized by a RAF Boston bomber strike, its crew vaporized in a secondary explosion of stacked shells. Yet Rommel adapted, his panzers screening the withdrawal with smoke of their own. Nebelwerfer barrages, laying chemical screens to cover the dash toward El Daba. Trucks laden with the wounded bouncing over the coastal track. Thorn's platoon linked up with the Highlanders at midday, the sun a merciless hammer forging the scene into memory. Captain Riley clapped Thorn on the shoulder, his clipboard swapped for a hip flask of captured schnapps. "Your daft idea, Lieutenant. It's in the dispatches already." Monty's praising the smoke symphony to Churchill himself. Laughter rippled through the men, brittle but real, as they shared tins of corned beef under olive drab tarps. McTavish raised his flask, toasting with a wry grin. To ghosts that bite back. Jenkins, patched up by a RAMC orderly with sulfur powder and bandages, managed a weak chuckle, his eyes distant, replaying the Wadi firefight where he'd lost 2 fingers to an MP40 burst. But victory's aftertaste was bitter ash. As the column pushed west, Thorn rode in a universal carrier, the vehicle's 50 Vickers chugging idly, scanning for stragglers. They passed a German field hospital tent, half collapsed, where Africa Corps medics tended their own amid the groans. Faces gaunt, uniforms frayed from months of siege. One young lieutenant, leg amputated below the knee, met Thorn's gaze with hollow defiance, his iron cross dulled by dust. No words passed, but the shared exhaustion spoke volumes. War's stupidity, its smoke and mirrors claiming suns from both sides. Thorn thought of the ultra-secrets that had tipped the scales, the invisible hands at Bletchley feeding Montgomery's moves, while Rommel groped in the dark. By evening, as the Eighth Army consolidated gains, the ridge echoed with the victors' labours, bulldozers from the Royal Engineers burying the dead in hasty graves marked by helmets on crosses, chaplains murmuring rites over the polyglot fallen. Thorn volunteered for patrol, his sten slung low, leading a squad along the old Axis lines. They found an abandoned 88 metres emplacement, its breech still warm, logbooks scattered like confetti, frantic entries tallying shells fired at British ghosts, coordinates false. A chuckle escaped Thorne, but it died at the sight of a child's toy, a wooden glider tucked in a gunner's kit, a reminder of the lives uprooted across the Mediterranean. Word came via runner that night, under a canopy of stars unmarred by flares. El Alamein held, the Axis pushed back 60 miles, supply lines severed. Rommel, ill with desert sores and dysentery, radioed Hitler for evacuation, his panzers low on fuel, crews demoralized by the endless feints. Thorne's trick, scaled from platoon ploy to brigade deception, had been the spark, drawing fire to nothing, preserving the real thrust that shattered the stalemate. Yet as he lay on his bedroll, the wind whispering through the acacias, Thorne pondered the cost. 8 men started the day, 5 walked away whole. The war ground on, from torch landings in Morocco to the Italian boot. But here in the sands of Egypt, a stupid idea had turned the Fox's cunning against him. Months later, in a Cairo billet, Thorne pinned his military cross ribbon, the citation lauding innovative deception under fire. McTavish survived to fight at Alameин's second battle, Jenkins to Normandy's beaches. The smoke grenades rusted in depots, their lesson etched in manuals, simplicity's edge in chaos. El Alamein marked the pivot, the Allies' first great desert win, paving the road to Berlin. But Thorne never forgot the human haze, the fear, the gambles, the ghosts that made artillery roar at shadows, buying tomorrow at today's price. The desert kept its secrets, but the trick echoed on, a whisper of wit amid the thunder.